All right, let me know when Alex confirms, and then we'll get started.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Please hold tight. I wish I had some background music for you, but we'll be getting started here in just a second. I'd like to give we have over close to 30 people registered for this meeting, so we'd like to give it a couple more minutes before we get started. Okay. Okay, everybody, we're just going to give it a couple more minutes. We have about half of our attendees that have logged in. Looks like we still have a few more. Happy Friday to everybody. We have you muted because of the volume of people that are joining us today. But if you have questions for us, please use the chat function in Zoom, which is in the bottom menu bar, and make sure it is, you can send any questions as we go through our presentation. And at the end of the presentation, we will be answering those questions. So just bear with us a couple more minutes. Looks like some folks are still trying to connect. I know the internet connections have been somewhat unstable given the pure volume of folks that are now conducting Zoom across the country. So if at first you don't succeed, please try logging back in if you get kicked off. It should bring you right back. I don't anticipate any problems, but just be aware if you do get booted off, it should log you right back in. And we are recording this and we'll post it on our COVID-19 resources page. Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's town hall meeting. Due to the volume of folks that we have had register, we have muted everybody, but we would like you to ask any questions in the chat menu bar, which is down below on your Zoom screen. We will be getting to questions after Kevin goes through the presentation. Today, we are going to be discussing two things: the economic injury disaster loans, the EIDL, and the Paycheck Protection Program, in addition to the employee retention tax credit and delayed payment and payroll taxes. So we have been sending out information on federal business relief that Congress has rolled through different iterations, phase 1, 2, and 3, and now is considering phase 4. We have been sending out member alerts. We appreciate everybody's feedback and also taking advantage of the NDA grassroots portal to encourage your Congress representative or senator to support these relief measures. And we thought it was time to hold a town hall to roll through the specifics of the relief package. So having said that, appreciate your time today. Kevin McKinney is NDA's Director of Government Affairs, has been working very closely with both industry, other trade associations, construction trade associations to coordinate our message, as well as representatives on the Hill and in federal agencies. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kevin McKinney. Kevin, you want to go ahead and get us kicked off?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff, and good morning to everybody. It's really great to be with you and to present some of this really important information. So Jeff did a great job running through our agenda for this presentation. So I want to definitely spend a lot of the time talking about the loan programs that were passed by Congress, because they are some of the really most impactful relief measures that are currently being promoted as COVID relief. Now, you may have heard that one of them, the Paycheck Protection Program, has recently run out of money, but I still would like to go over that because the likely outcome is that Congress is going to allocate additional money. So it'll still be an important piece of information, and we'll get into that. So we talk a lot about phases in terms of legislation. You've probably heard it in the news. We've also made reference to it in some of the NDA material that we've put out to members. So I think it's important to just go through a very brief overview of the legislation that Congress passed, and that will give, I think, some context to the content that we're talking about. When the COVID-19 pandemic really began to take hold, Congress jumped in and started to pass a series of bills that were aimed at providing relief in different ways. The first one was the Phase 1 bill. This was signed back in early March. It was March 6th. It was an $8.3 billion package. This one was not geared toward business relief or things like this. The main focus there was trying to get some immediate dollars into things like testing, exploring vaccines, trying to make sure that labs had the equipment they needed, along with some aid to countries that had already experienced an uptick in cases and trying to help them to suppress the level of exposure for their population, trying to prevent the spread of that. So that was what the Phase 1 legislation did. Moving on to Phase 2, this is where we start to get into a lot of the important information for employers. Phase 2 and Phase 3 are really where the meat of that is. Phase 2 was signed on March 14th. Now, this is the piece of legislation that Congress dealt with the mandatory paid leave requirements. Now, this applies to employers that have less than 500 employees, and they have to provide 2 weeks of paid sick leave to any employee who is unable to work due to a variety of conditions. But the main ones are if they are sick with COVID-19, if they are isolated, quarantined because of that, or if they're caring for someone who has COVID-19. And the other carve out they made was to provide this mandatory leave for employees who have children at schools that have closed. So they provided that carve out as well, so that certain parents could be home with their children. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the paid leave later, along with the employee retention tax credits that kind of go along with that. But this is a brief overview of the legislation. In addition to that, there was an expansion of unemployment. I think many of you probably are familiar with this. There was a $1 billion allocation for additional unemployment, and we're going to talk more about that later. But it's an additional $600 per week for those who are collecting unemployment benefits. And that has some definite implications moving forward. So we'll touch on that. And this one is also the one that dealt with those tax credits, the employee retention tax credit, to offset a lot of the impact from that mandated paid leave. So we'll get into the tax credits and some of that other stuff coming up. So now moving on to Phase 3, this is really where we start to get into a lot of the relief in terms of loans and actual money that the government has been paying out and processing since it passed. So this bill was signed on March 27th by President Trump. And really the big one that we were very excited to see is the close to $350 billion for small business lending programs. Leading up to Phase 3, NDA did quite a bit of advocacy work in DC to try to really make sure that Congress took small businesses, small contractors into consideration as they were dealing with these different relief measures. And so we were very active on the Hill. We sent many different letters. We engaged our grassroots strategy. We talked with other coalition stakeholders, really trying to emphasize the need for our members to get access to loan programs and other relief measures. So when Phase 3 was signed, we were very happy to see that Congress allocated, it was close to $350 billion. Now, the main way that this is being implemented is through the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And we're going to get into the details of each of these programs in terms of eligibility and what goes into them. But this was a big win for the industry, and it allows the membership and especially smaller employers who have less than 500 employees to take advantage of these low interest loan programs.
Hey,
The other
Kevin,
thing
I just
yes.
wanted to interject here that the Small Business Administration sent out communication on the NAICS subsector in terms of industries that are using this program, and construction ranks at the top with 114,000 loans approved, equaling to close to $33 billion, or 13.73% of the total amount of folks that have taken advantage of this program. So I just wanted to interject that.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That's right. I think that just really underscores the way that this was an important priority for our industry in that lobbying leading up to phase 3. And I want to make a quick comment, and I'll touch on it again later, but you may have seen in the news that the Paycheck Protection Program has run out of money. It's true that the $350 billion has been exhausted at this point, but what we want to emphasize is that we are, number one, doing advocacy around getting Congress to allocate additional money for these loan programs to make sure that our members who want to can still take advantage of them. So we are right now lobbying Congress to allocate additional money for this program. So we'll have some more on that coming up probably in the coming weeks. But we're doing some advocacy around that to make sure that Congress really shores up this program and make sure that our members are able to take advantage. The other one I wanted to touch on briefly for phase 3 legislation were the cash payments for individuals. So this provided up to $1,200 for individuals. It's doubled for married couples filing jointly. The criteria to receive this money, just very briefly, is if you make up to $75,000 a year, you would get the full amount. Between $75,000 a year and $99,000 a year, there's a phase down. So if you make $80,000, you make a little less than $1,200, and then gradually up to $99,000, it would get smaller and smaller. Once you're over that $99,000 per year threshold, the money you're not eligible for that money. So they're really trying to target that money for, people that are around or below the median income in the United States. In addition to that, there is a $500 per child payment as well. So if you make $65,000 a year and you have one child, you're going to get the $1,200, or if you're married, you're going to get the $2,400 plus $500 on top of that for the child. So that's what that did. And we expect those payments are in the process of being paid out. They're going to use 2019 tax returns, or if you haven't filed them, then they're going to use 2018 to determine eligibility for that. So I want to jump now right into these loan programs and talk about the eligibility and really some of the details about them. Now, the first one I want to touch on is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. This is a program that is administered directly by the Small Business Administration, which is different than the Paycheck Protection Program, which is administered by your local bank. So that's a big difference. So the SBA is processing this program directly. Now, the EIDL loans, these are up to $2 million, and the Small Business Administration uses some internal calculations and criteria in order to determine what your actual loan amount is. So not everybody gets a $2 million loan. There's a variety of criteria that go into calculating how much you'd be eligible for, but you would apply. And the interesting thing about it, although I've been hearing some mixed reports about how this is working, is for businesses that apply for an economic injury disaster loan program, there is a $10,000 emergency grant that you would get they claim within 3 days of applying. So simply just applying for this loan, whether or not you're approved, you get a $10,000 grant if you meet all the application criteria. This $10,000 grant is not required to be paid back to the government. So again, like I said, I'm hearing mixed reports about the timeliness of that grant being paid out. Overall, there's been some rollout issues with some of these loan programs, but in terms of the way that these loans are supposed to work, It's supposed to be a $10,000 grant that is not required to be paid back. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, these funds, along with paycheck protection funds, which we'll talk about, are required to be used in very specific ways that are really intended to help employers keep employees on. That is the role of the government, that is the intention of the government, along with making sure that a business can pay its rent, things like that. So the funds can be used for debt payments, making payroll, accounts payable, paying rent, and other bills that could not be paid because of this crisis. So it can't be used for things like bonuses or stuff like that. It's really intended to be used for this kind of stuff. Now, the other thing that's worthy to mention is these funds from the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, they can't be used for the same payroll and overhead as Paycheck Protection Program funds. So they have to be used for different purposes if an employer is getting both an EIDL and a Paycheck Protection Program loan. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of the eligibility for an economic injury disaster loan, it's small businesses that have less than 500 employees. Nonprofits with 501c6 status are eligible. Cooperatives are eligible. The interest rate currently is 3.75% for businesses. There is no personal guarantee that's required if your loan is less than $200,000. And the payments on these loans are deferred for 12 months. So the idea would be that you'd get a $10,000 grant within 3 days. Let's say you got a loan for $100,000. You would not have to pay anything on that loan for 12 months. Now, the $10,000 is not required to be paid back, so you can call that kind of a forgiveness. But economic injury disaster loans are required to be paid back for any amount above $10,000. Now, this differs from the Paycheck Protection Program, which does have the ability to be forgiven with certain conditions, and we'll talk about that. So if you're interested in applying for an economic injury disaster loan, the link that is on your screen right now under how to apply, which is COVID-19 relief.sba.gov. That's the link that you can apply to. This link will take you directly to the application screen on the SBA website. And it's a pretty straightforward process to apply through the SBA. So that's how you would go doing that. And again, this is administered by the Small Business Administration, which is a bit different from the Paycheck Protection Program, which is administered by your local lender. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So now we're going to shift gears and talk about the Paycheck Protection Program. Now, this is, like I said, administered by SBA-approved lending institutions. So the Small Business Administration is not administering the Paycheck Protection Program other than providing the implementing guidance on how the program works. But and some of you might be familiar with this, but when applying for a Paycheck Protection Program loan, that's going to go right through your local bank. And this program is going to be available through June 30th. And I want to mention again, we just got word this week that the funds have been depleted for the Paycheck Protection Program. We know that Congress is working on allocating more money, and NDA is working right now on the government affairs side to really push Congress to pass legislation that is going to allocate more money for these programs. We think that it's very important for our industry to be able to have access to this type of loan in this time of the COVID issue. So that's a big priority for us. And as Jeff mentioned a little bit earlier, the construction industry is really showing to be the top industry classification in terms of getting these loans. So we want to make sure that funds are available moving forward for this program. And I think that will probably be the case. And that's why I think it's still important to cover this as a topic. So for the Paycheck Protection Program loans, borrowers can receive loans that are up to 2.5 times their average monthly payroll, and that's capped at $10 million per loan. So $10 million is the highest amount of money that you can receive for the Paycheck Protection Program. The loans for this program can be forgiven if they are used for specific purposes like payroll, okay, certain overhead costs, and on the next slide I'll talk about a little bit more about what payroll means. But other uses for these funds are continuation of health insurance. You can use them for employee salaries that are under $100,000. Anybody over $100,000, you can't use paycheck protection funds for their salaries. You can use them on interest on your mortgage payments. You can use them for rent payments, for utility payments, and you can use PPP funds for interest on your other debts that were incurred prior to February 15th of this year. So that is also a legitimate, that there was a question about that when this originally was implemented, but that is you're able to apply them to the interest on those debts from before February 15th. So the eligibility for receiving a PPP loan is that it has to be an employer with less than 500 employees, S corps, sole proprietorships, independent contractors. These are all eligible to receive PPP loans. You have to have been in business since February 15th of 2020 and paid taxes on your employees or independent contractors. In terms of some additional information about the loan terms, I mentioned before, it's 2.5 times the average monthly payroll cost measured over the 12 months preceding the start date of the loan. And I wanted to mention what payroll means because there's always questions about, well, what's included in payroll? On the screen is what payroll means. It includes salaries, commissions, tips, employee benefits that do include health insurance premiums and retirement benefits. It includes state and local taxes, and it includes compensation that go to sole proprietors and independent contractors. So that is what would go into the calculation for your payroll costs that would be measured over the 12 months that precede the loan. So that's how you would calculate that. And like I mentioned, the maximum size for the loan is 1 million. The current interest rate for PPP loans is 1%. Congress, when they passed a law, put a cap on it at 4%. So it is possible that the rate can fluctuate. The original loan rate was actually 0.5%. It has since gone up to 1%. It's possible that it could go up to 4%, but that's the highest that it can go up to for PPP loans. So the current rate is 1%. So talking a little bit about forgiveness under PPP, which is different from the SBA administered economic injury disaster loans. Paycheck Protection Program loans are forgivable for payroll costs, rent on interest or mortgage payments, utility payments. So for the funds that are used for these purposes, that amount of money can be forgiven. But we have to say too, the Small Business Administration did administer guidance that at least 75% of that forgiveness amount has to be for payroll. So while rent and the interest on mortgage and utilities can be included in this and be eligible for forgiveness, you must use 75% or more of PPP loan funds for payroll. So payroll includes everything I mentioned on the previous slide before, so that's important to know. So how to apply? Again, I just want to mention one more time that currently PPP funds are depleted. But again, NDA is lobbying right now for Congress to allocate additional money, and we expect them to do so. It could be in a week or it could be next month. But my sense is that this is a very popular program, and I think Congress is going to allocate an additional round of funding. So it's something to keep in mind that what you can do is a few things. The best thing to do is to go talk to your local lender. Talking to your bank, the bank that you have a relationship with is going to be your best source of information about applying, because that is where employers apply for these loans. However, what I wanted to do was provide a link, which is on your screen right now. It's www.sba.gov/paycheck protection/find. That link is going to direct you to the Small Business Administration's directory, which you can just put in your zip code. I think it asks for address, but what it will do is it will identify an SBA approved lender right near you. And so you can go either to your bank or go right down to that bank if you want to make sure they're an SBA approved lender. And they will be the ones who are going to walk through the application process, talk about what's required, and actually process those loan applications. So that is going to be the best place to find an SBA approved institution that would be other than your local bank. So that's going to be the best place to find information about applications and processing those. So now pivoting over to the employee retention tax credit. This is a tax credit that employees are eligible for in order to retain employees during this kind of uncertain time. I want to make a note up front that this option is not available for employers who take paycheck protection loans. So if you take a paycheck protection loan, you're not eligible for the employee retention tax credit. So in terms of eligibility for this tax credit, there is no size limitation like we were talking about before with the maximum size of employees. This one does not have a size limitation, but there are some criteria for what constitutes an eligible employer. An eligible employer is an entity whose operation, this is according to the SBA guidance, an eligible employer is an entity whose operation is fully or partially suspended, that is in response to governmental orders, for example, this in your local state, that is limiting commerce, travel, group meetings, things like that, or has experienced a significant decline in gross receipts, which is a decline of 50% or more in quarterly receipts when compared to the prior year's quarter. So that is the eligibility criteria, but there's no size requirement. So you can have over 500 employees and take advantage of the employee retention tax credit. So the tax credit is 50% on the first $10,000 of wages per employee, and that does include health benefits. And so the credit is based on wages incurred or paid from March 13th of this year through December 31st of this year. But again, I want to just mention, you can't use this tax credit if you take a paycheck protection loan. So each situation, each employer is probably going to have a different situation. So the best thing to kind of figure that out is to look at your own situation, possibly talk to a tax professional. But this is the credit that's available that was passed, and these are some of the eligibility requirements for that. The other thing that Congress did in that relief legislation was provide for the option to delay payroll taxes. This is another one that you cannot do if you take a paycheck protection loan. But if you choose not to take a paycheck protection loan, you do have the option to delay payment of your payroll taxes. Okay, so in just talking about relief here and the way that you'd go about this, you still would have to pay these payroll taxes, but they're allowing you to delay them. So for the 2020 employer share of payroll taxes, these can be deferred and paid over the next 2 years. So it covers from March 27th and ends on December 31st of this year. So from March 27th through the end of the year is the period of time that you are eligible to defer those the employer portion of your payroll taxes. You have to pay these over the next 2 years, and it cannot go over the 2-year mark. And after 2021, half of the deferred amount has to be paid by the end of that year. So by December 31st of 2021, you will be required to pay half of the deferred payroll, employer portion of the payroll costs you deferred, and then the remaining half would be due by December 31st of 2022. And this is an option for all employers regardless of size. So again, this wouldn't be an option for employers who take a paycheck protection loan, but it is another option for employers, and it's something to consider as you're navigating options and how to best suit your business. So I mentioned before that we have Congress has also allocated tax credits for the mandatory paid leave requirements that were passed in the second economic relief bill. So this is a refundable tax credit for the paid sick leave, which again was up to 2 weeks. And it was a refundable tax credit for paid family and medical leave up to 10 weeks. So I wanted to share the IRS guidance that was released on this. Paid sick leaves covers these following scenarios. I won't read all of them, but the point of this is if an employee is under a quarantine order, if the employee is sick, so if they've been advised by a doctor, if they're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, if they're caring for someone, or if they are caring for a child because the school that they attend is closed, and childcare would not be an option. This is the criteria for who is eligible for the mandated paid sick leave. And so, yeah, and just a final note on this. The best thing to do for a lot more detail on this is to talk to an accountant or tax professional who has a little bit more of a grasp on your unique situation. But we wanted to present this as an option as you're navigating different scenarios. And I want to make a note as well. You can take the employee retention tax credit and the paid leave credits, but you can't use the same wages to qualify for these respective credits. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. I wanted to touch on the expanded unemployment benefits as well that were passed by Congress. Really what they did was if an employee is receiving unemployment benefits from one of the following places that are listed on the screen here, the employee or the worker would get an additional $600 per week that's in addition to the unemployment that they're already receiving. So it's an additional $600 per week. All the states so far have signed agreements with the Department of Labor. So that's something that you can expect to be in your state. The interesting thing is I know we're starting to see some problems in some states regarding the expansion of the unemployment. I think it definitely is still early, and we're going to have to see how that works out. But I wanted to make sure we made a note of the fact that the unemployment insurance has been expanded for COVID. So I wanted to cover just a few FAQs, and before I do that, just another note. Actually, I don't think I mentioned it before. I want to make sure everybody knows that you can visit the NDA website, and that will give you a lot of information about both COVID-19 relief measures that Congress passed, that federal agencies have issued guidance on, any other health and safety guidance that's been issued by agencies like OSHA. So we have a lot of resources that are posted. I'm soon going to be posting a more detailed FAQ document that's going to answer a lot of the questions that have arisen since the issues really have started to arise. So I just want to make a quick note of that. A common question is S Corps and whether they're eligible. Yes, they are. And C Corps, by the way, are eligible as well. If a business currently has an SBA loan and it cannot make payments, what course of action is a possibility? Disaster loans from previous disasters that you're still paying back, they have their payments deferred through the end of 2020 at this point. So there is payment deferral for those loans, according to the government. A big question is that if you employed 500 people on February 15th, but that number has dipped, or it's going to go down in the coming weeks, can you be eligible for one of the loan programs that Congress passed? And the short answer for that is we need additional guidance from the government. There's a little bit of ambiguity about that, but we are seeking clarification from the Small Business Administration, and we'll make sure that we get that posted on our website once we get that. And a common question as well is on the unemployment benefits. Is the $600 per week in addition to the unemployment benefits that they're already receiving? And yes, it is on top of what they're receiving already. I wanted to take a minute also and just shift gears and talk about the issue of essential business, because I think that's something that's on everybody's mind these days. And with all the stay-at-home orders and different things that are going on, I think it's important to just touch on that and some of what NDA has been doing. So I wanted to, number one, start with the federal guidance. So the federal government, as many of you may know, issued guidance through the Department of Homeland Security that basically was meant to be guidance for the states and provide them with a list of essential industries so that when they are contemplating their stay-at-home orders and designating industries as essential, that they'd have kind of a framework and guidance document that they could work off of from the federal government. So the Department of Homeland Security issued their guidance. This was going back several weeks. The big issue is the outstanding issue of whether construction is essential. The first iteration of that document actually did not include construction as essential. So we lobbied the Department of Homeland Security directly, both in direct correspondence to them on behalf of NDA, and we worked with some other stakeholders that are involved in the construction industry. And the Department of Homeland Security issued revised guidance that did clarify that construction is essential. So that was a win for the industry, because a lot of states are deferring to the DHS guidance when they're promulgating different stay-at-home orders and things like that. So that was a big win, and we were happy to see that. The outstanding issue is at the state level, and there are a few other state issues that are beginning to arise and create some additional concerns for employers. That is the biggest challenge, is the patchwork that is going on of different states doing different things. But we've corresponded directly with the National Governors Association on behalf of our industry to make sure that we're going on record. We're limited in our ability to really get involved in a lot of state lobbying for a few different reasons, but we did want to make sure that we had an opportunity to get our message out for our industry. And so we used NGA as a conduit to reach the governors, and we're happy that we were able to do that. So the states are going to continue to probably, go in their own direction, but the fact that the CISA guidance, the Department of Homeland Security guidance, has been revised to include construction is prompting states to go in the direction of recognizing construction, which is, we feel, a very good thing. So moving forward, in terms of what we can expect and what NDA is doing, these loan programs and some of the other health and safety guidance that's been issued are really coming out at a very fast pace. So we expect that additional guidance is going to be coming out for the loan programs and other things that both clarify some outstanding questions and possibly expand the programs to others who are not currently eligible. So one of the things that we're doing right now is just really keeping on top of the guidance that is coming out from these agencies and making sure that we share that with members through direct communication, through our website. And so we're going to continue to do that as that continues to evolve. The other thing I want to mention is that, and I briefly touched on this before, NDA is right now gearing up for our lobbying strategy for phase 4 legislation. So the ones we talked about earlier were phase 1, 2, and 3 for legislation. And there are a lot of reports about Congress considering a phase 4. And I think it's definitely likely that they will be doing this. So we want to make sure that NDA is really active and is going on record with Congress so that our industry is well represented and has a seat at the table in any relief measures passed by Congress in phase 4. A few of the potential issues that they'll consider in a phase 4 bill could be things like expanding the loan programs. I expect they probably will do that, which we are going on record to make sure that we urge them to do so. It's possible that we could see additional payroll tax deferments or cuts altogether. We could see, and this is sort of an up in the air question, but we could see some infrastructure spending in a bill. This again is going to depend on whether Republicans and Democrats can agree to anything. It's kind of shaky in terms of infrastructure, but NDA is going to be including infrastructure in our lobbying strategy to make sure we're going on record urging them to adopt infrastructure spending in a few different scenarios as part of the phase 4 package. So that's going to be one we go on record for. And we're going to be getting some additional intel over the coming weeks from Congress about the way that a phase 4 bill might shake out. And we're going to be right there with Congress, making sure our industry is represented. And we'll definitely be reporting to members on how that goes. And of course, when they do a phase 4 and we get some wins in there, which I'm very confident about, we'll communicate that as well. Well, I know that was quite a bit of information. Hopefully that wasn't too much of drinking out of a fire hose. And so I'll go ahead and pause there and see if anybody has any questions. I'll turn it back over to Jeff, and we can see what we have.
Thank you, Kevin. That was fantastic. We have a couple of questions that have come through, so we'll get to those in just a second. I do want to, first of all, thank each of you for joining us on this call today. It is through your membership in the National Demolition Association that provides us the resources to be able to lobby on behalf of the industry on Capitol Hill. It is through your membership in the NDA that provides us the resources to be able to compile a web page that we have created, which is the COVID-19 resources page. It is on our website. If you go under the membership bar, and it's a drop down, COVID-19 resources, we have compiled different documents. We have compiled information from the SBA. We will be putting this presentation and the recording on that web page. And I do want to thank everybody here for their membership. It has allowed us to do this. Now, having said that, we are encouraging all of our members to send out a link to the COVID-19 resources page to anyone and everyone in the industry. For those of you that have heard the Red Hot Chili Peppers song, Give It Away Now, that's what we're doing. We think that everybody in the industry needs this. You know, a rising tide raises all boats, and so we want to be able to lift the industry. So please send that out to colleagues. So having said that, thank you again, Kevin. It was a great presentation. A couple of things John sent over, a quick note. He just said, my banker told me if you have your loan number, then the funds are reserved for you. The SBA site shows $247 billion has been paid thus far. That is correct. Once you have your loan number, in theory, you should be receiving the money, although as Kevin mentioned earlier, there has been a lag there. John Satterwhite sent a question for us. It says, when we calculate our PPP loan amount, we did not include any monies paid to employees over $100,000. That being said, can PPP money we receive not be used to pay all payroll, including employees who are currently on pace to make over 100K, since the loan amount we received did not include amounts over 100K? And I guess I would just preface that with your best resource for answering this question would be your local bank. But Kevin, do you have any additional insight on that question?
Yeah, this is one of those examples that you're right, local bank is going to be a good resource, but we need additional guidance from the Small Business Administration based though on, and this isn't, I don't want to come across as giving any financial or legal advice to any of these questions. But that being said, the way I'm reading the guidance is that you cannot use those funds for payroll over 100,000. But John, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow up with that question today in terms of just rechecking the guidance to make sure that that's still the read based on what's the newest guidance that's been issued. And I will get back to you directly on that question.
Thank you, John. And another question from John Bottorff. Our CPA has us use annualized total wages and then deduct the total amount in excesses of 100K salaries. So again, back to John's question, this total 12-month wage was then averaged to the 2.5 months. So it would seem that the PPP loan should be able to be used to pay 52 weeks times 100K at 15,348 max per employee. So that's just answering John's question.
Right, and that's a good point in terms of the CPA, because a lot of I can communicate what's been passed by Congress, and I can relay you to the newest guidance that's been issued. A CPA is definitely going to be the best resource for a lot of the really detailed questions about certain calculations and things that are going to go into your individual loan, because everybody's going to have a little bit of a different scenario, and somebody that's more familiar with your finances is probably going to be the best option when considering some of the more detailed questions. So that's a great point about talking to the CPA too.
Right. Are there any more questions for us? Like I said, we'll be posting this on our COVID resources page. And as always, myself or Kevin are available to answer any questions offline.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us this Friday morning. We certainly appreciate it. And we'll be, once we get this digitized, we'll be putting this PowerPoint as well as the recorded webinar on our webpage. Please feel free to reach out to us. Kevin, thank you. And thank you for everyone that joined us today.
Thank you, everybody.